Well, there's still no publicly known motives yet in Toronto or Nashville. Let's bring in former CIA analyst at NYPD Intelligence Division leader Buck Sexton. Great to have you with us tonight, Buck.
Good to see you, Shannon.
All right, two very different cases. At this point, there's still a lot of detective work to be done on what drove these two men, but a lot of people are raising questions about whether it's mental illness, whether these are copycats, whether they're motivated by anything beyond that.
In the case of the Toronto attack, it certainly bears all the hallmarks of what you'd expect from an ISIS-inspired attack, although we haven't seen any chatter yet from ISIS channels saying that they are claiming this individual as one of their own, which they often do, although there's sometimes a time lag. And people have noted that they don't see anything right now about motive. And until we get a sense of this attacker's social media background, what he was into, what he was up to, it's very tough to tell. It is worth noting that someone's name, someone's background, wherever he may be from or his family may be from around the whole world, it doesn't really matter. He could be ISIS-inspired. It's an ideology. It's not about what he looks like or where he may come from. So we just simply don't know enough beyond that other than looks like a terrorist attack. And then in the case of this Waffle House shooter, here you have somebody who's obviously deranged, and the questions that I think a lot of people are asking right now revolve around, well, we knew this, law enforcement knew this, they took firearms away from him. Why the firearms would then be given to a family member is a question that I know a lot are going to be posing. And also, was there something that could have been done on the side of mental health here to perhaps institutionalize this individual? It certainly seems like he needed a whole lot more mental health attention than he got leading up to this incident. He was on law enforcement's radar, and it feels like the system failed here once again. Fortunately, a citizen, an everyday citizen, stood up and was a hero and saved some lives, but it doesn't feel like law enforcement in this case acted with enough proficiency to get it done.
When we look back to what's happening in Toronto, and the police chief there has said, we're looking at everything, the motivation, we're looking at all the things you mentioned. Of course, you would go into an investigation, social media and those kinds of things. Apparently what they're saying thus far is the police weren't familiar with him. This is not somebody who had a long record or a lot of interaction with them. If it turns out he's mentally ill or if he was motivated by something linked to terrorism, do terrorist groups even care? I mean, they are looking for people who are unstable in some way anyway. So whether this person is pledging allegiance to them or not, if they're somehow inspired by the attention that somebody gets for carrying out one of these vehicle attacks, it seems like an easy way to get a lot of notoriety.
Well, there are certainly plenty of psychopaths and sociopaths, deranged individuals who have been very active members of terrorist groups, stretching back as long as we've been paying attention to these things. So it's not as though you can't have dangerous mental illness coinciding along with somebody also adopting an ideology that would push them to engage in terrorism. It's happened plenty of times. And I think if you do a psych profile on a lot of members of the Islamic State, for example, it takes a very particular kind of person to engage in beheadings on video. So these are not things that we should think of as necessarily being separate. That said, with Toronto, we simply don't have much more in the way of data to suggest that we are at a motive. I mean, we know it's terrorism. It certainly looks ISIS-inspired based on all the markers for this kind of attack, based on what we would look for in terms of the target set here, essentially random and as many casualties as possible using a van. But when you look at this Waffle House shooter, you're talking about somebody who just seems like is completely deranged and should have been averted somehow. This could have been averted if you had just had more concerted effort from those around him. I mean, I think the biggest lapse leading up to the event seems to be from the father, although I'd want to know how and why. I believe it was a sheriff's department in Illinois, on behalf of the FBI, took the weapons away. Why did the weapons get back to the hands of the father? What was the regulation there? That seems like very poor judgment. Yeah,
and if the licensing was stripped in Illinois, it may not have prevented him from having ownership in Tennessee. A lot of questions as states handle these individually from state to state, different approaches. Buck Sexton, thank you for weighing in. Good to see you tonight.
Good to see you, Shannon.